Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Verdict podcast. I am Linus Theo Lampe, bringing you the latest guests. I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Edward Dempsey. Ed, say hi.
Hello. Hi.
Today, we have an extremely special guest. He is a venture capitalist. He is an extremely interesting person, and he's got many interesting stories and interesting acquaintances as well. So the word interesting is clearly a key theme. First, we want to just tell you about the amazing opportunities that Flamenc Law Society has for you as law students. Ed is the vice president and he is with us now. Ed?
Flamenc Law Society offers great opportunities in helping provide information about future careers in the legal sector, but it also helps build up your personal speaking roles through debating, mooting, or negotiations. Any and everything that can get you prepared for the future job in the legal sector or adjacent sectors if you so wish. A brilliant society that does a lot of fun events, a lot of pub quizzes, a lot of well, we can't really do a pub crawl at the moment, but pub quizzes online. And we'd love for you to get involved. It's only £10 membership, so please sign up. Love to see you there.
The links for all that will be in the description at the end of the video. Tell me, are you a sad person who cannot seem to get in front of an audience and speak about a topic you love? Well, you are sad no longer because the Public Speaking Society has begun. It's hosted by Emmanuel, Patricia, and Nana. They are good personal friends of mine and they are running a great society. So the links will be in the description for that. Please look. Now, to our guest, Stephen Norton. Stephen, do you just want to introduce yourself? Tell us what you do.
Stephen Norton. I run a company called Daedalus Partners. We're a venture capitalist. I've been doing this for about 10 years. We've invested in everything from a tequila brand to a Michelin star pub to a driverless car business to a one of the things we invested to a soft drinks brand. So almost anything at all. So spent a lot of time meeting entrepreneurs. Actually, some of the entrepreneurs I met were in your university who've set up a very successful company called Charged Up. A guy called Hugo Tilmuth was in Falmouth only about 5 years ago, and his business is now worth approximately £50 million. So
wow.
If you Google Charged Up, he pivoted his business during the COVID lockdown and now provides hand sanitizer units under a brand called Cleaned Up for all of London Transport, for Diageo, and he's just raising another £20 million to essentially develop his brand into Served Up, so people can go into bars and restaurants and order using his proprietary software. But no, it was curious and coincidental that he just happened to go to the same university as you guys.
Brilliant. Well, you mentioned tequila, and I actually have the bottle here.
Ocho.
The Ocho, exactly. I have dabbled in it, and it is very smooth and very lovely. And many people around campus have tried it, and they love it. So, Stephen, how did you become a venture capitalist? Like, what was your main, kind of encouragement to, pursue this type of career?
I guess I didn't really have a very structured career path. I went to school in Somerset, went to university in Durham, trained to be an accountant, and then sort of saw very much where life took me. And life took me after accountancy training into the film and TV business, where I worked at Channel 4 Television and Film 4 for about 10 years and really enjoyed doing that. And then joined a film financing company where my career took me into financing as opposed to publishing, which is what Channel 4 did, and film production. And then from there, by learning about finance, I learned about venture capital, which is sort of the interesting side of things, and built a network of funders, project originators to help me set my business up 10 years ago, Daedalus.
So you went to university at Durham. How was that? Did you enjoy Durham?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I was living in Somerset at the time, so it was about as far away as I could get from home. So it was quite curious taking the train 5 hours to Durham. It's changed a lot now though, but it was the best times of my life. Played a bit of hockey up there. Didn't really leave the city very much, but I go back quite a lot now to Newcastle as part of my job. So Yeah, I think it's different now. It was less, how can I put it? It was less vocational. It was more, it was more, how can I put it? Free thinking a little bit more. It was less structured. There isn't the same focus on this sort of thing. There was a debating society. There was a rowing club, a boat club. There was a strong cricket section where Nasser Hussain played, Will Carling and Phil de Glanville were playing rugby. So it was pretty sporty, but it was collegiate. So you had a sort of a base at your college, and then you had a base where you went to lectures. It wasn't heavy in lectures. It was probably about 10, 11 hours a week. Everything was on paper. I'm 50. I'm not, 90. But literally, I went into the university computer laboratory, which was sponsored by Deloitte at the time, to use Lotus Excel. To give you some idea how fast things have changed. There was no email, there were no computers in the college, there was no Wi-Fi, no phones. So it was quite different. And I think listening to other students I've met, it's very, very different now. The way of being assessed, the amount of information you can access.
Yeah.
The days of queuing up at the library in Durham to get books for a couple of hours to read a particular article have gone, I assume. And everything.
Yeah, well, yeah, they have here. We have online libraries and online access. It's shocking. Gone are the days of reading paper. And what was your first feeling? I mean, I talked to loads of uni students about this, actually. When you closed the door to your dorm and you realised there was no parents telling you what to do, no one controlling your life. Was the first feeling, I'm going to go out and get absolutely smashed? Or was the first feeling a bit of fear and anticipation?
I guess it was, I've always been quite stoic. And so it was always like, well, this is what's going to happen anyhow. Everyone does the same thing. It wasn't new to me. My dad went to university in Oxford. And it was just like all my mates went off. We all disappeared all over the place, literally all over the country. And immediately you met people, and everyone's very much on the same page as you at university. It's the most cognizant and synergistic people you'll ever meet, because they're in exactly the same place as you in their lives. They're the same age. They have the same interest. They've chosen proactively to do something. The fable that you meet your best friends of your life at university, do you believe this to be true? Well, it might. That they sort of had what they called a matriculation, I think, ceremony, which obviously they can't do now. But you basically went up into Durham Cathedral and you sat there and they said a few words. And they said that half the people in Durham would meet their husband or wife there, which I thought was a pretty, everyone certainly looked around a little bit, put it that way, and became very nervous. Did anyone catch your eye, Stephen?
Start pairing up.
Just start preparing your hit list. A lot of people... And that statistic was probably right. Looking at my peer group, that a lot of people, ended up with people. But interestingly, sort of after leaving, they met them. If that makes sense. Yeah. Someone they didn't really dabble with them during the university. Dabble with them. I love that term. Yeah, that was interesting. You say that. I think some people find that quite daunting, being told, that your future life partner could be in the same room. And what was the pub culture like there? Explain to us just the uni nightlife, because it's something that everyone is interested in at the moment, because obviously the freshers don't have it and the second years have lost it. So I'm sure it'd be very nice to hear some stories of the uni nightlife. I guess for me, because I played hockey for the university, there was a whole scene going on there, which was quite... how can I put it? It was based around playing games and then going out and socialising. Durham was collegiate as well, so every college had a bar, and then there was a students' union with a bar. And Durham City is a strange sort of place, because at the time it was in the midst of sort of post the miners, mines closing down. So there was a lot of people would come into Durham to party on a Saturday night locally, and the students and the locals never really mixed. It was quite a strange sort of world. So in terms of going out to local pubs, there were pubs, but that really wasn't the scene. The scene was very much about the college bars. The college bars were sort of, had their own identity. One was in a castle. There were new student colleges, and our own college had its own sort of really nice bar. But there was the hockey, and then there was just other things. You would always meet people at different places, and each of the colleges would put on an event. They would sort of almost rotate semi-informally. So there would be like a disco or some form of. Everyone was really into balls, dressing up in dinner suits. Mashed up doing that, but it was fun. But now I don't know what it's like now. I mean, it must be pretty poor, because I've seen pictures of the students in Newcastle and Northumbria University, and I've seen them in Liverpool. It looks.
We're quite lucky because we're in the southwest, which hasn't been locked down to the extent that they have. But yeah, looking at the university, Manchester had a lot of their student halls locked down. I know a lot of people that have got affected by that actually, and it's very scary times for them, I assume.
Yeah, you've got to figure it out, haven't you? Whether they should have just stopped for a year, and I'm not sure that would have really helped. It would have just put more pressure on the system. Then there was the debacle with the A-level results, which meant I assume there were a lot more people here at your university anyhow, as they weren't turning people away who made their grades. So yeah, I feel a bit sorry for you guys. I mean, when I did it, it was brilliant. You just I can't think of anything better to do. I mean, that was. But again, it's all part of it was a pretty well trod route. What I did, which was to go to Durham and study accountancy. So it wasn't like I was breaking boundaries. It wasn't like Hugo, who was at Falmouth, who I talked about earlier, who always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and he ran a DJ business when he was in Exeter, doing booking DJs out to student sort of gigs. That thing didn't exist when I was there. It was all about, there was a milk round, and literally hundreds of companies would come and interview, literally, and try and get people to come and join them. It was very formulaic. There seems to be a lot more flexibility now at the end of it for you guys.
Yeah, it's harder though now. It's harder. You've mentioned, companies coming in to kind of interview you. That doesn't exist anymore. Companies come in to do a speech to you, and then you approach them, and they basically, 90% of the people that apply get cut and 10% get in. Like, it is so competitive, so brand orientated, so social media run. Where does social media come into your work? Specifically LinkedIn, because a lot of our listeners will be utilizing LinkedIn. Oh, I've got 100 connections. Oh, what does this mean to you?
It means nothing to me. No, because it's almost, LinkedIn's become a sales tool, so people sell you things on LinkedIn. So there's probably lots of good reasons. I like LinkedIn because I know if I meet someone in real life, or who I've been introduced to or connected to, that I know who they know. But when you see people who are trying to sell some sort of, they're always people just try and sell you stuff and try and get you on the phone. People now, they even try and sell stationery to you on LinkedIn. Or who's your stationery supplier? And of course, suddenly you're not mixing with the likes of McKinsey and Bain and strategic sort of connect. It really is people who've just sitting down, tapping away. You put your school in, and suddenly you'll get 100 people calling you. You put your university in. I was, I know someone who was there. Did you know them? And it's like, well, no, he was there 20 years before me. And it's like.
So you get irritating people like Ed and I trying to invite you onto podcasts and sell your ideas.
But I know you see, that's the whole point, and that's why.
Yeah, well, of course.
But whenever I meet people who want to raise money for stuff, I say, who would you really like to invest? And then they go, what do you mean? And I go, well, if you're doing an ice cream brand, wouldn't it be great if George Clooney was the face of it? And I said, well, you now need to figure out how you get in front of George Clooney. Figure out how you raise money. Do you see what I mean? It's a way of looking at the same problem. So once you figure out that if you want to get a job at Linklaters or Freshfields or wherever it is, then you've got to figure out who you're going to get in front of. And then you go, well, how do I get to know that person? How do I get an introduction to that person? And well, a lot of the VCs now don't accept people applying to them for funding. They say, just find someone who you know who can introduce you. Because if you can't do that, fuck you must be useless. Do you know what I mean? They're these people who are just desperate to meet interesting people. But if you can't find a connection in your group with them, then perhaps you're in the wrong business, or you need to find someone who can connect you.
Yeah.
That's
Ed,
why.
What do you think of this LinkedIn debacle and all about what Stephen said?
The way you've described it sounds a bit like the sort of like 6 degrees of separation. You've got to work out your best route to find whoever. It seems like this whole game of connections, which quite a lot of people might not sort of like understand, in the sense that they just connect with as many people as possible, but don't do any strategic thinking behind it. I find that quite interesting from your point of view. Obviously, having done quite a lot of having quite a lot of experience with companies like Channel 4 and then your own Dayless partners.
Yeah, I've had LinkedIn since it basically has been invented. I mean, I heard about it from my dad. He was talking about LinkedIn one day, and I said, I want to be rich. I'm going to get LinkedIn. And then I literally just sat there and I was just connecting with everyone that popped up. And that is not the way to do it, which I've learned nowadays, is you've got to really think about what connections you want for the field or industry that you're attempting to intercept or get into. You talked about, we talk about LinkedIn, but what about the old-fashioned way of networking, Stephen? The classic clients out for dinner, meeting people in London. This is the bit that students really dream of, rather than having to go through all this LinkedIn rubbish. What do you think about that? Has that died now?
Well, I think people, when you network, if you want to call it that, you need to have a purpose. A lot of people just want to collect business cards, and so there were some people who are really good at it, and it's not for me. So we used to share an office with a guy who would go to Farrers, which is a big law firm, and he would come back with like 100 business cards, and he would just chat and meet people. Whereas I was always happy just to sit in the corner and have one conversation. I also don't like standing up and talking to people. I like sitting down. I find it difficult to engage with people jostling into you. But ultimately, it's all about connections. It's about being introduced. So we were introduced to someone last week who we met in London, who represents a number of Cameroonian football players who play in the Premiership. And that was an introduction, which was all about trust. And it was all about them, people meeting you and saying, yeah, my mate said you're going to be fine, and that's what it's all about. And I think that's the skill which you develop, which perhaps the younger people don't understand, that introduction is actually really, really valuable, and you can't cock it up. So 3 or 4 of my friends have got me to introduce their kids to people that I know, and all of them have fucked it up. They've not returned phone calls or have, and it's been like, and the problem is, of course, it's quite a big favour for me to ask someone I'm working with to go, can you give him a job? And they go, I'd love to, just get him to call me. And then it was like, oh, he hasn't called. Why hasn't he called you? And I was like, and he's like, well, and of course it's really embarrassing for everyone. But I think it's about, if you're focused and you know what you want to do, like there's this driverless car business in Oxford. The guy's, another example, he said to someone, what do you want to do? And he goes, I just want a job for the summer, which was like, shit, do you know what I mean? It's like, well, he has 150 people applying for placements on his thing. And so ultimately, unfortunately, it comes down to who you know. And that's really, it's not very, there's no meritocracy in all of that. It's, and some people are good at connecting people, people are good at networking. But the problem is that, you can pay people to do that for you. But then you have to figure out how valuable is that. So if someone opens the door for me into somewhere and I make loads of money, how much of that should I give that person?
Yeah, I think the problem in society these days is Alec Baldwin talked about it on an episode of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee with Jerry Seinfeld. He said that people these days, especially comedians, they think that there's a talent commission that's going out and knocking on people's doors and going, I heard you're really talented, do you want me to make you rich and famous? That's not how it works. I think that people have to learn to sell themselves, because especially the modern generation, they set up a LinkedIn account or whatever, they go, oh, daddy knows this person, daddy knows that person, daddy will put me in contact with this person and I'll get a job. But even if you have the connections, what you've just described to me there gives me the vision that you have to sell yourself as much as possible and explain why you've chosen that person to network with. What is it about driverless cars that interests you so much, rather than just saying, oh, look, mate, it's just a summer job, I just want to rake in some cash for a summer. Is that what you're trying to say? You have to sell yourself and give the employer a reason to want to hire you, rather than just saying, I've got these qualifications?
I think you have to have a narrative, we call it, when we fundraise. You need a narrative, and everything needs to be consistent with your narrative. So if you're raising money for a project, then the narrative all needs to be consistent, from who your co-founders are, who you're speaking to, why you're speaking to me, and what you're telling me. So when you go and approach the driverless car company, you probably have one of two options. One is, all I want to do is to get into programming driverless cars. Or two, I want to understand more about it. And I've got a rotation of three different things. So the narrative is consistent. There's nothing worse than someone going, oh, well, I just want some work experience. It's sort of, that's too broad now. You need to be saying, I want to learn about something. Be it.
That's very valuable. That's very valuable information, because I know loads of people that are applying for work experience at the moment. So that's really useful, Stephen. Ed, do you want to interject here?
I was actually just pretty.
This is a quick crowd. You've got to.
Yeah, I know, but I was pretty content listening to what he was saying, because it's all good stuff for my future and for the future of everybody that's listening, I guess. But yeah, no, I just think it's something that you maybe don't think about. Well, I know I haven't thought about as much, but yeah, you need to have a very clear sort of like plan of attack, but also a strategy to implement that plan in terms of work experience and getting it. And something I'm definitely going to take under advice now.
But it's a precision as well, and it's not. You have to be a natural. You'll both find it easy to talk, but it's like, what you can't sort of do is you don't want to be talking to people early about stuff. You have your moment with someone. You say, yeah, I'm all in. Let's, can we talk about how we do this? And then you're fine. Whereas if you're going, well, I've got to speak to this chap on Friday about something else, and there's just, it becomes confusing, and you just need to sort of figure out which bus you want to be on. Otherwise, they may all arrive at once. Else it becomes incoherent.
Yeah. So let's continue the Stephen Norton fable. So you come out of uni, you got your fill of beer, fill of fun, you've got your degree. You then move into the film industry and the Channel 4 and Film 4 you were mentioning. How did you come to that, and what inspired you to kind of get into that industry?
How I got into it. I was doing a bit of work when I was training to be an accountant with a film company. I was valuing a film library. And it was really interesting. It was in 1997, I think, ages ago. And there was a film called Absolute Beginners. There was the Mona Lisa was a film with Bob Hoskins, Stephen Rea, and there was a company called Palace Pictures. Palace Pictures were in some financial difficulty and were trying to raise money off a film library. I really enjoyed just the whole experience of working around creative people, and that sort of set me down a path where I worked for a family office who owned a film company called what's it called? It was called Revcom. Revcom owned a French film library, included the original version of Dangerous Liaisons in French.
Oh, right. Brilliant. With John Malkovich.
No, the original. There was a
the original. Oh, right. Okay.
There was a 1950-odd version in French. And they had made strategic investments, and they had an American subsidiary. And then they also owned British Pathé News, which owned all the old film archive. Do you know that Cockerell?
Yeah.
And through that, I met someone, and over a few pints, he took my CV and there must have been a Guinness circle on the CV, and he gave it to his wife, who was head of program finance at Channel 4. And I literally went for an interview the next week, and that took me into Channel 4. And Channel 4 was a super duper place to work. It was amazing.
Brilliant.
It's almost, how old was I? I was probably about 26, 27 working there. Whereas I think now the idea is you go and get those good jobs immediately. Whereas I'd spent 5 years almost preparing for that move by training to be an accountant and getting some sort of background experience before approaching them. It's a very difficult entry point. I mean, some of the people who are runners at Channel 4 were people like Dermot O'Leary. He was making coffee for people. There was Andy Peters. He was a commissioning editor. He's a very funny guy. He used to live around the corner from me. Who else was there? Ben, who's on one of the Big Brother shows. He was also making coffee for people. But it's an incredibly vibrant place to work. But again, that they're looking for exceptional people to do stuff, and it's very difficult to enter these companies. So I worked there and got involved with everything from the Madness of King George, Train Spotting, For Wellington a Funeral, Chris Evans doing TGI Fridays, everything from doing stuff with Aardman Animations, poker shows. We did a late night strand, bought friends, met Jennifer Aniston, filmed this concert. It was all good stuff. It was good, and I was at the perfect age to do it. It was great.
What do you think about Stephen, Ed? Is he a possible gold mine for guests?
It literally sounds like you've got just connections everywhere.
We're going to get them off him. Stephen, it's interesting. You mentioned, I met this person. I met that person. It really resonates with the networking conversation we had. What did you do with Train Spotting? Because I like Train Spotting. I think it's a fantastic film. What was your involvement in that?
I was simply part of the group which helped put finance together. So Channel 4 is slightly odd that it's not a production company. It's a publisher. So Channel 4, the only show it actually makes is
Channel 4 News.
No, ITN make that. There's like a points of view show which it makes, so it doesn't actually make anything. So it subcontracts to different parties. So a lot of what Channel 4 do is pull things together. So essentially, during my time there, I worked in over different strands, being responsible for the finance of it.
All right, so that's where your finance kind of began. Your, not accounting, because there's a fine line between accounting and what you do. I think we have to make that clear now. But why did you find it, kind of disappointing that you'd moved from not being an accountant into a different kind of area, or were you like, okay, this is an opportunity, I'm going to take it and just see where it goes?
So essentially, at some point, you have to figure out what you're good at. And you can be, and I know some people who I know now who are excellent accountants, and they've got jobs doing the most wonderful things all over the world. They go to Africa and audit NGOs and charities, and Bill Gates' foundation doing really
and finance directors for like Label M. Yeah.
I'm sure we have to do a good slot as well. But then you realise that you have different skills. Some people are good at project management. Some people are good at pulling things together, and some people are good at being like supporting people with a different talent base. So I felt I was always quite good at supporting people with very strong creative drive and ambition, and so helping those people, make things happen. And that's sort of what I did at Channel 4. Being a trained accountant is really handy because you can look at stuff really fast and you can go, yeah, this is fucked, isn't it? Or no, this looks really good, without having to scratch your head a little bit at it. So I find it very easy to look at numbers, and that's what it teaches you. In the same way, if you study law, you can look at a contract really fast and go, don't like that indemnity or that warrant, or not sure, that's quite a long time I'm committed to this. And so you can look at it fast, and looking at things fast, you get to the problem faster. and then you can solve it. And that's where all the energy is, not getting to that point, because it can be really tedious getting to that point. So I guess at Channel 4, for me, it was all about helping, as part of a team, ultimately under a creative person to make that all happen. So one of the guys I worked with was a guy called Stephen Keane. He was used to be the editor of the Guardian Guide, and he was one of the original editors at Yahoo in the US. And he'd come to the UK to produce sort of cutting edge TV on a low budget. And we did all sorts of really weird things. If you go on to More 4, you can watch, what's it called? The Journey, which was a show, which was, I've actually got a credit on it, which was about cutting house music to pictures of NASA footage. So the idea is you would come home spaced out after a night out on the tiles, and you'd pop on the TV, and there'd be all this NASA footage with this sort of really funny, funky music going on as you help you relax and come down after whatever it was you were drinking or eating. And so, yeah, it was different.
Yeah.
But it was all about changing television, because television at the time, there was, I think Film 4 was the first terrestrial sort of second channel. Channel 5 had only just launched. So it was, and then E4. But the idea of, how can I put it, of making TV non-linear. So the first thing they did was kept repeating the same film over and over again in different slots, rather than big on demand, because the technology for on demand was difficult, and ultimately there wasn't the capacity of bandwidth or the users to take that feed anyhow.
Ed, what's your experience with Channel 4 and E4?
I'm a huge fan. I know they had the Big Bang Theory on there for a while, and I know it's not what everyone likes, but I personally quite like it. And because it's quite interesting. Cause, I'm not going to say I know too much about TV and film back 20 years ago, or whatever. But I wasn't really aware of the fact that Channel 4 didn't make their own things. They sort of subcontracted out and then got other people to produce them. I find that quite interesting.
So at the moment, there's a debate about whether Channel 4 should be sold or privatised. So it's owned by the government, effectively, through a trust. And the idea of Channel 4 was to essentially create diversity in its output. So there was a lot of multicultural, religion, current affairs, news. And also there was the idea of creating an independent production sector in the UK. Yeah. Hence, that's why it didn't make its own programmes.
Oh, right. Interesting. And then, so once you sort of like finished your time at Channel 4, what did you go on to then? How did you sort of like progress your career from that point?
Then I was about 30. And when you're 30, you have all sorts of decisions to make, and you're like where you are. And I was having a whale of a time. I was the youngest person in this department of 35 people earning really good money. There was an amazing social scene, like you wouldn't believe.
Describe it to us, Stephen.
My favourite story was one of the Channel 4 parties, and they decided to do like I think it's S&M, where the theme was all sort of like chains and people in black leather and stuff, and it was just surreal, and people got really into it. Just whatever anyone did, it was always very. It was always very entertaining. There was lots of very funny people knocking around, and that was, have you ever listened to Henry Rollins?
No.
Henry Rollins is an ex-MTV rocker. He's also what they call an urban poet.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Google Henry Rollins, and we did a show with him once, and he was very, very amusing. Meeting Prince's lawyer, or was it the artist formerly known as Prince? Getting into a tangle about what he wanted to be referred to, and
he wanted to be referred to as a symbol, didn't he? He no longer wanted to be called Prince. He wanted just a symbol. The artists, and so they can be quite nuts, but if they weren't nuts, they would produce what they produce. So, Stephen, we've had the Channel 4 fable from you. That's brilliant. And so after that, you ventured into venture capitalism. Am I right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Brilliant. Do you want to explain, as someone who is a venture capitalist, what being a venture capitalist means, what it is, what it involves, just really briefly?
So I guess venture capital is a form of finance, and finance is for companies which are starting up or are in an early stage. It's as simple as that. So the risk is very different, as is the return. So the idea is you invest, you can invest in bonds or gilts, and you might get a return of 3%. If you invest in public equities, you might get a return of 6%. If you invest in venture capital, you're probably aiming for a return of in excess of 20%.
Okay.
And that's the game. The game is complicated because you try and invest in a portfolio of companies, some of which will fail. They may all fail. So it's like betting on a horse in a race at 20-1 rather than on the favourite. And that's very much what venture capital is. So there are some famous venture capital firms like Sequoia who back Facebook. Companies which have backed Twitter. There are loads of San Francisco-based venture capital firms who have backed some of these massive companies of late. In the UK, there's a similar ecosystem. There are lots of companies who make good money investing into startup businesses. Graphical, a Bristol-based company, I think made a lot of money for quite a lot of venture capital investors.
Yeah, Ed and I, while you were away, we were talking about Dragon's Den, and we were trying to compare it to what you do. Is that appropriate?
Yes and no. I mean, I think we know some of the people around Dragon's Den, and it's a TV program after all.
So, yeah.
But ultimately,
the idea that you're basically investing in an idea or a starting business to then, weighing up that risk and reward, the risk is higher, but the reward is also higher, as opposed to investing in, let's say, government bonds or, the stock market.
The fundamentals of it.
Yeah. It's fundamentally Dragon's Den, except Dragon's Den has a slightly strange, there's one idea with potentially 6 investors, whereas obviously in the real world, you don't sit in front of 6 people. You don't aggregate investors like that. It doesn't really work. I mean, occasionally there are these evenings where people come and pitch. But again, most of the things that we invest in, we get through our network. So we receive very few unsolicited things that we end up investing in simply from a due diligence, from a risk perspective, that we don't want to see our investors lose their money by investing in things which potentially is, how can I put it, lacks some integrity. So if you originate things from your own network, it's much easier because you've already validated quite a lot of the risk away by it being introduced to you. We get referred a lot of deals from lawyers. So Cameron McKenna refer us deals. What's the other one called? There are a number of law firms who will refer deals to us. And lawyers are quite good at sniffing out people who aren't, all they say they might be. And lawyers also get paid. So lawyers are really good at, identifying people who are, substantive, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. So can we do a little activity, like a little venture capitalist activity? Ed and I are going to pitch you an idea about a podcast. You're then going to tell us what you would look for from a startup business, what you'd look for them to prove, what you would look for them to provide you with, so information like on their idea, on their tax or whatever, and we just want to see how that would work practically. So Ed's going to start by pitching your idea. Go on, Ed.
Well, I think it's probably best if we base it on this podcast, something that we've already sort of started working for. So we're a joint partnership with Vermont Law Society, actually, so we're not technically a part of them, I don't think, but they've given us funding to run this. And we've already had 3 guests on, and we've got about 6 hours worth of footage already. So we've got footage. We've already got a decent social media going. I know at the moment we've got about 130 followers on Instagram. We've got quite a lot of subscribers on YouTube. So it's there's already interest in the podcast, and we've networked ourselves to get people interested in it. I think this is where Linus comes into the sort of like big that side of it.
So Ed's talked about what is happening now. Now I'm going to talk about potential, which is what someone like you in your industry would be most focused on. You know, we don't see limits with this podcast, okay? We have a USP that is, we are not a podcast that interviews and grills guests. We're a podcast that has a chilled, relaxed kind of chat, but at the same time implements, you know, academia, societal issues, and heavy topics. So what I'm saying to you is marketing is at our forefront. And by marketing, we will get this podcast out there. We're getting advertisement, we're getting everything you could possibly need to be a successful business and a successful brand. And the only thing you've got to be really asking is, why haven't you invested in the Verdict podcast? That's our pitch.
So there's different ways of looking at this, and we support Virgin, Richard Branson's company, and they run an incubator for startup businesses, and we help people refine their pitches. I guess in reverse, what you need to do is you need to make me worry that I'm missing the next big thing. So you need to create FOMO, and that's the thing which you haven't done. I'm not worried that, if you said to me, there's one of my mates who's pissed all the time, he's in the laboratory and he's got this AI drone which will go into my eye and make my sight, I'll be like, let me at him, sort of thing. You see what I mean? Whereas, you've pitched something relatively generic. To give you some idea, some of the pitches we've had, the sort of people we see, it's sort of, how can I put it? I suppose the earliest stage one was the guys from Exeter who came in, and they put this box on the table, which was like a toaster, and you put your battery into the box to charge it, and then you take it out and you can return it somewhere else or charged up. And we all were like, we had massive FOMO with that one. So, we knew we would regret not having invested in it. Likewise, the driverless car pitch was these two guys bundled into the office who I didn't really know who they all were, and they said, we're going to build driverless cars. And I said, really? Don't they do that? Don't Waymo do that? And all the big US companies? They go, yeah, we've built one already. And I was like, really? And the guy explained that he used to head up Formula One engineering at McLaren and worked at Super Aguri. He also is a team principal of one of the top Formula E team, and the other chap was employee 5 at Expedia. So you suddenly get this heavyweight sort of, right, okay, right, you're not dicking around here. And I guess so if you were to critique so ignoring all of the sort of those things, if you were to critique, you never told me how you're going to make any money doing this.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it was just an idea I came up with like 5 minutes ago, but
it's a good idea
what the purpose of it was. It's interesting that to hear you talking about what you look out for when you're seeing a pitch or whatever, and creating the need, creating the want, basically saying that if this is something we don't invest in, we may miss out. So are you essentially saying that the key to venture capitalism and getting a venture capitalist to invest is basically trying to persuade them that if they don't invest, they're going to miss an opportunity that could cost them a lot of money?
But if you think about it, that's the end point you get to wherever you start up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ultimately, that it's binary. You invest or you don't. Arguably, there's a level of what level you invest, how much of your pot you invest, and at what cost to you, what valuation to the company. But apart from that, you're going, am I going to miss out? But also you're measuring up other things which are coming along as well. A lot of venture capital firms have much narrower criteria, investment thesis, objectives than we do. So some will only invest in life sciences, some will only invest in university spin-offs, some will only invest in consumer goods, some will only invest in SaaS computer based platforms. So there's quite, some of them are quite narrow. So a lot of people won't get through certain doors because their idea doesn't fit in. The other thing you didn't sort of talk about was why you actually needed the money.
Oh yeah, of course we don't.
Well, that's sort of, and that's what most people realise, that, you know, if I said I'll give you 50 grand for half your company, you go, well, that's quite a lot, isn't it? Half, and then you go, but 50 grand's a lot, and then you go, well, what am I going to do with the 50 grand? And that's the other thing you didn't talk about, was what you're going to do.
Because I was just going to ask, so like, when you look to come in, so like want to then invest, how much do you need to know about the project? Obviously, you do your due diligence, you want to be aware of what it is, but do you go out of your way to just be completely and utterly so like knowledgeable about the product, or do you leave it to that and have a little bit of faith in the fact that it's going to work?
You take enormous faith in the founder, and you just look at what they committed to it, be it time, be it leaving a good job, be it their own money, whatever it might be, their reputation. The other thing you look at is how you can validate it externally in some way. So, you know, to give you an example, one of my school friends was the chairman of Shazam, and he sold it to Apple. So he's always a good person to contact to say, you know, what do you make of this? Likewise, we know a lot of people in the food and beverage industry who we can run ideas by as well. So, you know, being able to validate something externally is incredibly valuable. Or you can even go a step further and pay someone to validate it. So someone can come and have a look at the code, or someone can, you know, really knock the what's out of it. But ultimately, we invest early, so often these ideas haven't got traction. You know, they may be even pre-revenue, but as soon as you start selling something, it's much easier to validate something. So,
would you say you invest in people more than you invest in a company? So when you're met with, you know, a pitch, if you don't like the person that's pitching, you're immediately going to be switched off. If you think they're an arrogant arse or whatever's happening, and you're just going to switch off. Would you say that 50% of basically your decision making is your faith in the person, your faith in, you know, what you believe their potential is as a company runner, or, you know, how would you describe your thought process?
I think you know, what we do is if you imagine we're an early stage venture capitalist, almost like an angel investor, and then there are venture capitalists who will invest in what they call pre-Series A, then Series A, Series B, Series C, Series D, and as you go through here, it becomes more institutional. So some of the venture capital companies, you know, have raised in excess of £10 billion to invest. SoftBank, who invested in Uber, and WeWork, I think they invested in Uber as well. I mean, they drop £1 billion in. So what I do is very different to what some other people do. But for me, I'm looking for someone who can take where they are now to somewhere with the money I give them to a place where they've increased the value of the company disproportionately.
Okay.
But that's what I'm looking for. And you're right, it's almost always people based. Do I like the person or not? If they're arrogant and they're good at what they do and they can, you know, that's fine, you know, let them get on with it. But ultimately, it's all about integrity. That's the thing. And I think integrity is something which some of the more millennial-based people we talk to don't have any of. That they see the investment world as a game. That if they say the right thing, the money comes. But I think that's a big mistake, because you just end up in a tricky place at some other point when you say that contract you had was actually only a conversation you'd half had with someone, and it becomes, you know, it's about integrity. And then, you know, hopefully we can connect people up with them to make it worth, you know, make it worth more. For instance, we've invested in a really interesting business called Cork, CORK Studios. Cork Studios maps all the influencers, and you can speak to Cork and you say, I've got a podcast in Falmouth, and I want that to become big, and I want get some influencers involved, and they'll sell you a subscription, which will allow you to access this massive database of influencers.
I understand what you're saying. You've really sparked my interest with the word cork. We'll leave it at that. It sounds brilliant. But I was going to ask a question. I think it slipped my mind, but I'm sure Ed's got some burning questions that he'd like to ask.
Well, just along the lines of when you knew you wanted to do sort of venture capital, and obviously you run where you're a part of one now, what was sort of like, do you remember that first meeting where you did that first investment, like the feeling behind that?
Well, I guess we'd already teed up a couple of things in advance. So it was, you're essentially aligning all the planets before we started. So we had a very clear idea of what we were going to do from day one, and we had all the pieces in place. It was just about extricating ourselves from various other things we were doing, and then off we went. So we raised some money for developing wind farms, which ended up being really successful. And then we raised some money for some London, prime central London property sort of related transaction, which wasn't so good. And then we, what else? We did some video games which weren't so good. Then we did Tequila Brown was good. So, the problem is it's a bit up and down, and that's the nature of the whole thing.
What would you say, because at Exeter, I know there's an entrepreneurs society, and I know probably most of them will be watching this, especially as we've got a venture capitalist on. What would your advice be to someone that's looking to be an entrepreneur and someone that could one day find themselves in front of, a well-established venture capitalist like yourself?
I suppose the things that I find is people try and speak to me too early. So, there's no point having a chat with me because what can I really do to help? Because I'm expecting that person to come with the white heat, if you see what I mean. It's like, would you be interested in investing in for a while, all I got through my email were pet social media-y sort of things, like dog walking and pet grooming, endless pet insurance. And it was like, I'm sure your dog one will be much better than walkie-walkies or talkie-talkies. But it's generic, and for me, I then have to go and sell what the investment is to my investors. And of course, if it's generic, they're like, they want things which are interesting, which makes it exciting.
They want the next best thing, not the thing that's currently happening and a recreation of it, if I understand correctly.
Yes, so it's about being innovative and bringing something to the table. So we spoke to a guy yesterday, I think it was from San Francisco, who has a great idea, but I almost said to him, well, actually, it's a really good idea. I don't really need you, so I'll just go and do it myself. Again, you have to figure out what it is you're actually bringing to the table, and if it's as easy as me to listen to him speak for half an hour and go, great, I'll get 20 developers from Lithuania to design me exactly what you've discussed. But if you think about it, think about Ola and all those variants on Uber. Think about all of the micro-mobility scooter deals. I mean, it's there's no barrier to all of this. It's a land grab most of the time. But if you just have an idea and you have no traction, you have no runway with it, you've not done anything with it, but apart from articulating it, then really, what have you brought to the table?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Ed, anything?
You keep deferring to me, but I'm really just interested in listening to sort of like your stories in the industry and how you've handled not adversity is not the right word, but the ups and downs, sort of like the peaks and the troughs of the business.
I just know when you get on a roll, Ed, you get on a roll, my friend. Anyway, Stephen, just to have a little break from the constant questioning, do you want to hop into the word association round? I think I've got about 10 words for you.
So I thought someone did this once, and I can't remember where it was. It was in James Bond, wasn't it? Was it Casino Royale? When James Bond...
You've changed your shirt, Mr. Bond. Yeah.
he did word association. He kept going about death and blood and guns. And do you remember that?
Yeah,
one?
it was Skyfall. It was Skyfall. When M is he fails his initiation test again, and he gets put into the field anyway. He does a word association test.
Right.
You know, the answers either kill, death, scotch, or sex. I think it's the only answers he comes up with. Anyway, I'm sure they'll be very different for an established man like yourself. So I'm going to start straight away. Money.
Success.
Risk.
Life.
Mental health.
Important.
Education.
More important.
Networking.
Necessity.
Alcohol.
Fun and games. Oh, 2 words.
Stock.
Stock. Stock. Like in chicken soup or
whatever you want it to be.
Whatever you want to say.
Stock is a strange word. Stock. Chicken soup.
Corporate.
Bigger.
London.
The centre.
Investment.
I guess my life.
Legacy.
Death.
Regret.
None.
Charity.
Charity or clarity.
Charity.
Strategic.
Capital.
Difficult.
Venture.
Beginnings.
Venture capitalist.
Optimism.
Brilliant. Well, that was great. You did really well there. We've had some. We've done a few with guests, and then there are some slip ups for sure. But you performed very, very well there.
I just wanted to pick up on charity and strategic. I thought that was quite an interesting.
Yeah, so did I. I was
words.
actually just about to say that.
So I guess we've become quite. We were doing a big social project business in Newcastle, which is called the Moncur Group. The Moncur Group is the guy who's the chairman. His name's John Moncur. John was a Premiership footballer. He's about my age, maybe about a few years older. He played for Tottenham. He played for Swindon. He played for West Ham famously. He's best mates with Paul Gascoigne, Harry Redknapp. He's people describe him as the funniest footballer you ever meet. And he's always wanted to do a social project, an investment, which we're helping him do. And I guess I've become the incumbent COO of this business. And the business is opening residential children's homes in Newcastle. And through that, we've been introduced to a number of charities in Newcastle. One of them is called Children's North East. Children's North East is one of the oldest charities in the UK. And Children's North East is all about children. And they famously, basically the kids were down the mines in the late 1800s. And they would take them to the seaside, and that was charity. And it's become more and more strategic. That's why I use the word. So they talk about what they call it, a hand up rather than a hand out. And it's all about making charity strategic and how you get the most value. At the moment, the charity's spending a lot of time dealing with domestic violence cases, and there's a domestic violence helpline they've set up, which a number of very high-profile people in the North East have funded. Because of lockdown, people have become stir crazy, and obviously that hasn't helped the children who have been, had to watch all of this. So that's sort of why I see. And I guess friends of mine have worked at Friends of the Earth, which is all about bees and air quality around schools, which is quite interesting. And it's a very interesting area. There's a lot of money flying around in charities, or some of the bigger ones, it's just figuring out, what do you do? So Children's North East famously give school uniform and football boots to people to wear so they don't look out of place. So imagine you go to school and maybe the kids who pay for their school lunches go one way and ones with free school lunches go another way. Then that already creates an issue for them to be essentially excluded. And it's, how do you make everything more inclusive? And that's a pretty big thing that Children North East does. So that's why I describe charity as strategic, and sort of listening to these people who do certain things and why they do it. But ultimately, all of the Children's North East charity work comes as a result of high levels of poverty, and poverty breeds these issues, and that's a problem that isn't getting any better, and it won't get any better, I don't think. So.
Yeah, because when you said it, I sort of understood why you'd said it and how charities do have to be strategic with, obviously, they get funding and how they spend it and how they best affect change in their area. But I don't think it's one that most people would have thought about. It's sort of thing, it harkens back to you being sort of in the job that you're in and thinking about the best way to sort of run it and get the most out of it. Just thought that was really, really interesting.
I think that there's a lot of there's this whole thing called ESG, environmental, social, government, I think, which is this whole fun choice thing. And I guess if you take off the prevalent points and you invest in things which are socially beneficial, and you can, make it tangible that you're doing it, then hopefully it will create its own momentum and its own commercial success. That's ultimately the aim of it all. In the same way that that people who are taken out of homes because their parents can't look after them for whatever reason find themselves more likely than not to be in court at some point in their later life and be in prison, and that's not an optimal outcome for society in any way at all. But it's big. These are big issues around poverty, and how do you take people out of that? And it's about being strategic. And I don't have the answers for all these things, but what little we can all do to help, or just to start doing something, I think is a really interesting place to be. Hence the John Moncur or the football Moncur group, children's care homes we're going to start setting up on a for-profit basis, but in conjunction with charities and a local council in Newcastle and South Tyneside.
Sorry for my absence. I had a technical difficulty, but no, that does sound very interesting and strategic. But yeah, no, it's interesting that through your work and through your career, you seem to be constantly coming in contact with a very varied and diverse bunch of people. Do you enjoy constantly having a new project on the run and seeing it all the way through, or would you prefer to narrow your focus as your career, develops even further?
It's a really good question, and I suppose it's a question which I keep coming back to, as friends of mine have gone and done one thing. So that there's a big, you might even have seen the name Burrington Estates down in Exeter. It's a big property developer. You might have seen some of their sites. And he was doing what I was doing, and he simply moved his family from Suffolk to Exeter and set up this enormous, very strategic house build, which has been very successful. And he gets a lot out of doing that. And I guess the concern is that you lose focus by trying to do too many things. So at the moment, we have quite a lot of things on at the moment, and we're looking at 2 or 3 other things. And realistically, you can only really do 4 things at any one time, in managing investments and trying to help and be strategic, or strategic commercial, I suppose, to try and push it all forward. But yeah, so it's good fun when you're younger, I think, doing lots of things. But as you get older and you see the issues and you have more experience in terms of turning the or energy to money at some point, then doing fewer and being more focused makes a lot more sense. unfortunately.
I'm just going to go through a few audience questions just to change it up a bit. I'm just going to go through now. I usually scan them first, but these have just come in, so they're quite fresh. No, I'm not going to ask you that. Can I have a job? No, I'm not going to ask you that either. What is your advice to people running a portfolio of investment themselves? And if you could give one piece of advice of companies you would invest in or the amounts you would invest, could you give them? Just give a generalized answer to that. Don't give specific companies, because I don't want you to feel like liable if people lose a lot of money.
So I guess a traditional portfolio is, excluding your own private residence and pension planning, is approximately 70% of your money would be in a discretionary portfolio managed service. So that would be stocks and shares. And you'd run it through, I don't know, Hargreaves Lansdown, JP Morgan, whoever. Then you have roughly 20%, which would be in, I would describe as assets, like property, maybe investment property or gold, all that sort of stuff. And the final 10% would be in alternative assets, which is what I'm talking about now. So you would do your own allocation. In terms of what we do, our investments range from a couple of 100,000 to 2 million, but I think our sweet spot is about 750,000, because 750,000 can take something from sort of here to here, and you get a disproportionate uplift in value. So, for instance, the money we put into many of our businesses is worth 5 times within a year, because other people will invest because they've got on so much further. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, suddenly you've got 2 customers and you've got 200. That's so much more attractive to someone than the 2. And psychologically, the value just goes up and up and up. And that's what we look to do. So hence 750 is a good number.
Yeah, I've got 2 more. One of them is, I'm an economics student at Exeter. I'm in my first year and I'm very much enjoying my studying. Do you have any advice for someone that is looking to become a venture capitalist or otherwise angel investor? This advice can range from networking ideas or work experience ideas.
I was an economics graduate as well, so I think there are two traditionally in the big venture capital firms like 3i. There are 2 entry points. One is when you've got grey hair, when you're 50, or when you've just done your chartered accountancy exams. Life's changed. I'm trying to help someone at the moment get a job, and it's very difficult. Most of the people we see who are young venture capitalists in their mid-20s have actually done some form of entrepreneurial activity before. But that's exactly what's happened. So they're no longer wet behind the ears. So they've gone and set stuff up, they've run stuff, or they've done stuff on their spare time. It can be anything from helping your mate set up a small group of coffee shops to to helping someone do presentations, just to be part of that whole thing. And I think that's how I see things working. So joining a startup, probably unpaid, to get experience. In terms of learning to invest, I mean, there are platforms like Seedrs and Crowdcube. Why wouldn't you go and put £10 on one company and invest £100 every quarter and see how your investments do? In terms of my experience was, I'm a qualified accountant, and that really helps me, and what I do really helps me, and being a lawyer also would help me as well. And I think it's about economics as an activity is really good for me, for macro, and also for understanding change at the margin about what people do. So one of the examples I always give to people who pitch businesses to me is the pub example. So we've invested in a Michelin star pub in Hackney.
I've been there. Very nice. The marketing.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? Yeah.
Brilliant.
And it's run by a Michelin star chef from St. John's and someone who used to run 15 for Jamie Oliver. And people. So if I was to open a pub in my local area, then the pub would open. But then, what's the dynamic of that pub opening? does that mean that more people will leave their houses to go to the pub, or people swap their existing pub for that pub? And if people start swapping, how will the other pubs react? So you have to sort of look at the margin, what activity you're causing. So, for instance, if you take an Uber, or if you take a electric scooter ride somewhere, then you may have taken a bus. So then the bus companies, money will go down. If you're spending £6 on a burrito rather than going to your preferred fish and chip shop, then the fish and chip shop may start adjusting its pricing. So it's about fluidity and the idea that that markets do organically increase. But when you have an idea, how do you validate that people are actually going to buy it? But even more importantly, what will the competitor do to react?
So it's all about basically looking at the macroeconomy and trying to use the theories and what you learn to basically apply it to real world application.
No, it's more about the micro. It's more about, so you're sitting there at home.
I'm sorry, micro. I meant to say micro. Apologies.
No, it's like you have 50 quid in your pocket. What are you going to do with it? And are you going to pay for your Spotify subscription? Are you going to pay for your Disney subscription, Netflix subscription? What's your, what are you going to do? And then if something new comes along, will you buy the next black and white French film subscription? Well, if you do that, then that means you swap out Netflix maybe, then Netflix may lower its price. And every decision is like that in life. You're making decisions.
Okay, well, I think that's good advice. The last question I've got, I'm a bit skeptical about asking it, but I'm going to ask it anyway because, what the hell? It's just regarding what. It's written really crudely, but I'm just going to say, what are you going to do when you retire with all your slang word for money made from your investing?
But remember that I'll have made money investing only if my investors make money. So I think that's a sort of it's a quite strong corollary that I invest other people's money essentially into things, and then hopefully I make them money, I make money. So it's I'm very aligned to the people I work with. But a lot of people, who I work with, I've become friends with them because, again, they have very strong integrity, and integrity in business is really, really important. And we have a lot of fun doing things because I do know that at all times they have my back, and in particular my investors' back. So hopefully, I'll do this for a good few years yet, and then at some point, when I no longer want to do it, I can just stop and sit on the beach and
south of France. Yeah, is that is that where Cap d'Antibes? But is that where the end goal is?
But again, I know so many people, and it'd be nice to just to go and sit in a pub, or help people do more socially minded things. I think it's really important that that when you hear some of the stories from children's from the children's care home world, it's really, really brutal. And the more you can help, the more you can connect the dots. You get enormous value from doing that personally and societally as well.
Ed, have you got any questions? I've got one more for Stephen, one of my own personal questions, but I'd like to pass on to you.
I'll let you ask your question because I'm still forming mine. I think it might be a bit too polite, but I'll let you ask yours.
All right, brilliant. I'd just like to know, Stephen, at what point in your career did you see a significant turning point where, any goals you had, any objectives in your mind, you felt like you'd actually made it? You felt like, I can be comfortable in life right now. I know that I made it to where I want to be.
I'm not sure I've ever reached that point, but I remember when I was 25 and I met up with quite a big group of people who were school friends, university friends, work colleagues, and we all sat around. And it was astonishing the different ways that life had taken us all. And I guess at that point, you had to learn to be comfortable in what you had achieved, else you would have gone mad. So one of the guys had traded since he left university and was swanning around in a Lamborghini. Another guy was unemployed. Another guy was teaching. Another guy was, and so on and so on. So at that point, you have to grow up quickly, and you have to go. Either you're an adult and you can cope with different levels of success, or you can't. As I said, one of my school friends was the chairman of and CEO of Shazam. I suspect he walked away with tens of millions of pounds from that. A group of us met up and mulled over what we'd all achieved in the 3 or 4 years since we left university. And that range of people was from a very wealthy trader who was swanning around in a Lamborghini, to an unemployed person, to someone who was teaching at a primary school, and a number of people like me who had embarked on the professional career paths. And I guess at that point, you had to grow up and realize that there was always going to be a range of sort of economic versus social versus hierarchical sort of differences in what everyone achieved over time. You either grew up at that point or you'd resent it forever. As I said, I worked with a guy who's a Michelin star chef who grew up with Jamie Oliver. Jamie Oliver's worth, £250 million. He's not worth anything like that at all. Yeah. So, either he ignores Jamie Oliver, his name, or he just, accepts it's all good. So, so that sort of was the answer to that question around when did I really think I'd made it or not made it. But really, I think you just have to accept that, you do what you can and you take advantage of things. When you have energy and momentum, you go for it. You just keep plodding on a bit. But when you have when you have the momentum, and momentum's a big thing in investing, that when you see a group who've got good momentum, then you back them. So many people are still, you can see people who've got momentum. It's really easy to spot.
Well, thanks for that, Stephen. Ed, have you got any final points, any thoughts?
I've just got, actually it's a bit of a question, but so obviously you said you basically invest people's money for them. There's a sort of add-on to that bit, which I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer or not, but the first bit's just, so how many people do you have investing through you, sort of at any one time into one project? And then the sort of side of that would be, have there ever been any situations where there have been sort of issues with that? Maybe it hasn't gone as to plan and investors have had sort of an issue. That bit you don't necessarily have to answer if you can't.
Yeah, I think there's a sort of things often don't work out as you would like, and I suppose you try and work out at what point you pull the plug, because ultimately it's often better to give something that chop it away. And investors obviously aren't very happy, and then they don't invest with you anymore. And you try and you hope their advisor or they be considered the 90%, the 10%, and a bit of that 10% is going in with me. We normally have between 20 and 25 people invest in every project we do. Some invest anything from £5,000 up to £500,000. And there are a range of people from professional sportsmen to people who work in the city to entrepreneurs, property developers. So it's a complete range of people. But it's not, how can I put it? I'm not looking to score £100 from people in the street. There's of no value to me. It's people who have got significant amount of liquidity and have thought about a strategy for dealing with this. So ideally, if you've got a couple of £100,000, you should think about maybe investing in maybe 20 companies, and that's your strategy. Not going, I think this new ice cream is going to be fantastic, and then realise when you go into the shop, you'll see there was like 40 in Tesco's, and you go, that's a pretty tough market, isn't it? And then you realise that it's all just shit that you've been sold, and you just need to be. What I always liken it to is the Olympic 100-meter final. Do you ever remember the guy who came in 6th place or the woman who came in 6th? You don't. You always remember the first 3, maybe. And that's what venture capital is all about, is sort of getting to the 100-meter final.
Well, I think that's a really good point to end the podcast. And I'd like to just thank you, Stephen, for that. That was really insightful, really brilliant. And I knew you'd be a very interesting bloke. We will obviously off camera absolutely go through all your books and get all your guests and all your contacts. But that was brilliant. And we here at the Verdict Podcast want to thank you very much.
Yeah, it was really great.
Offering your time to do this with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Yeah, so Ed, what did you think of that guest? I thought he was...
I thought he was really, really interesting. He gave a view on an area in society that I myself wasn't well versed in, sort of venture capital. It's something that gets bandied around a lot as a term. I'm not sure everyone really understands what it is. So after listening to that, I'm now aware of sort of like how he deals with his day-to-day life and sort of how people can make money, but in a controlled environment through investing in startups that genuinely can go somewhere.
So should we come to a verdict on whether you'd invest with him or not?
Yeah, I'd invest with him. He's great connections. He was very, very switched on, very personable. I think, what you were saying about integrity is really what I think personally I'd look for in any situation similar to that myself.
Yeah, but I don't. No offense to Stephen, I wouldn't invest with him, but just because I don't like heavy risk based things. I like taking risks where I know I can win.
That's not a risk then, though. If you win, it's not a risk. Yeah,
I make my own luck. But no, I thought he was a really insightful guy, and obviously he's a close family friend of mine anyway. But it was really interesting to hear him talk, about his business in such depth that I've never heard him actually talk about it. So yeah, we'd like just to say that Flamank Society is available on
only £10. Very reasonable price.
Instead of investing in a balanced portfolio, why not just invest in your future, in your career?
Exactly.
With Flamank Law Society.
Where else are you going to be able to debate, moot, negotiate, and get advice on a future legal career?
I'm going to talk about mooting now, actually. I've got a question to ask you, the audience. Are you the next Harvey Specter? Are you the next Michael Dershowitz from LA Law? Well, the only question you've got to answer is, am I ready to be? Because if you are ready to be, all you have to do is sign up to Flamank Law Society and get the next opportunity to be in moot court and express your advocacy skills to real judges. All you have to do is contact Anton Doyle. He's a very approachable guy. He's linked into the Verdict Podcast Instagram page, and his email will be in the description at the end of this video. Please stay tuned and wait for our next guest. We have got so many more interesting guests coming on, and we are hunting for the big names. We are the Verdict Podcast, and this is Linus Leo Lampe, the Triple L, signing off. Thank you very much.
This is Ed Dempsey signing off. Thank you very much.